All right, what's up, people? I'm back for part two. Hopefully, I'm not going to go longer than an hour. I'm a little downtrodden because my Raiders lost a tough one on Monday Night Football. That's neither here nor there. I want to get back into kind of the core issue that we were talking about before, which is there was the coverage of the recent House committee hearing, and it was done by the Committee on Oversight and Reform, headed by Chairwoman Carolyn B. Maloney. And this particular hearing took place on September 29th, so about a week ago. And then the whole point of it was it was dedicated to examining the harm to patients from abortion restrictions and the threat of a national abortion ban. I went over what Representative Clyde's statements were and kind of the philosophical presuppositions that undergirded them with respect to both the abortion issue and like trans ideology or just gender ideology, kind of woke gender ideology. I also went over AOC's kind of response to that and how that could be seen as kind of clapping back against Clyde in particular. But really just against the Republicans or conservative types that kind of rival the Democrats on these issues, on both the abortion issue and the issue of gender, and I guess what they would frame as trans rights issues. So now what we're going to do is, and also I started before going over the Daily Wire's kind of coverage of it and the kind of the salaciousness of the headline. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the left and how they kind of commit some of the same mistakes that I think people on the right commit in terms of covering these things in very tribalistic ways, very partisan ways, and not really getting down to the nitty gritty, the substance, the ideological underpinnings, and then the real controversies of the issues, recognizing and emphasizing the validity that there is on both sides. Our kind of tribalistic political culture is antithetical to doing that. People on the right nowadays, particularly if they're prominent in the media, only want to recognize the validity on their side and act like the other side has no validity whatsoever. And I see a lot of this on the right and also on the left. People on the left typically want to recognize only the validity on their side and act like everybody on the right is super crazy or Bible thumping idiots, uneducated people, etc. Those are stereotypes, and as with most stereotypes, there's a lot of falsehood to them, even though there's maybe some truth to them to a certain degree. They're overgeneralized and usually pejorative, and the pejorative elements of them are usually exaggerated in these tribalistic political contexts. So I'm going to now shift gears to the Young Turks coverage. Now, this is a rather long segment, so I'm going to be stopping periodically and maybe even skipping some things, because a lot of the things that they're going to show, I've showed you already, and I've showed you unedited. And part of why I did that, by the way, is because TYT does this thing, and it's not just TYT. A lot of media outlets do this generally, independent media included. TYTs are different. They edit these things in such a way as to make whatever kind of point that they're trying to get, talking points they're trying to get across, or position that they're trying to convince you of or persuade you of, look the most plausible or the most favorable. And with that sometimes comes this kind of intellectually dishonest censoring of context that is not conducive to those positions. So to a certain extent, I want to try to expose some of that, because I think TYT engages in that, just like I think that Fox News does it a lot, and maybe even like the Daily Wire and stuff. So I'm going to try to give my commentary on their commentary on the things that I've been talking about, and that's probably going to make this extend for extended periods of time. So bear with me, and here we go.
Dr. Kumar, can biological men become pregnant and give birth?
So men can have pregnancies, especially trans men.
So can biological men become pregnant and give birth? So are you saying that a biological female who identifies as a man and therefore becomes pregnant is, quote, a man? Is that what you're saying?
These questions about who can become pregnant are really missing the point. I'm here to talk about what's happening in Texas.
This is me asking a question and you answering. I'm asking the question, sir, not you.
That is Representative Andrew Clyde, and he is indeed asking asking a question, but he's not interested in any answers to those questions. And to be clear, he's doing something else. He is intentionally wasting an opportunity to actually learn something about a topic he pretends to care about. He was speaking with Dr. Bhavik Kumar, director of trans care at Planned Parenthood, a literal expert on trans care. This guy questioning him has no idea what he's talking about, but he's also not interested in finding out. He's interested in grandstanding to tell the MAGA base that he despises the trans community.
All right, so I actually think that there's some truth to that, although I think he exaggerates it slightly. I do think that there was some kind of political theater and he uses words grandstanding on the part of Clyde. I do think that there was a missed opportunity for Clyde to learn some things. What annoys me though is that the Young Turks generally, and this dude in particular, whose name I forget right now, don't have the same energy when Democrats do the same shit. And when they lose out on opportunities to learn about shit they don't fully understand from experts, right? His position on that would be more respectable if he was willing to do that. I've never seen them levy these same kinds of criticisms against their own side. And so I don't really trust it when they levy them in just one direction. If they had demonstrated fairly consistently that they're willing to levy that against their own side too, then I would respect them more. It's not that the Young Turks don't criticize the Democrats. They do criticize the Democrats, but usually they criticize the Democrats because they think that the Democrats are doing things that they associate with conservatism. And they think that the Democrats essentially aren't woke enough. That's primarily the kinds of criticisms that I've heard from the Young Turks against the Democrats, that their policies are not progressive enough, and that the Democrats are guilty of kowtowing to the evil dictates of the no bad, very, very evil Republicans. That's usually the kind of criticisms that I have. And so it's hard to respect these things. But, you know, TYT has their bias. I have my own biases too, to be fair. But these biases are potent. Some strong Kool-Aid they be sipping at the Young Turks. But let me let him continue.
He doesn't give a damn about them. He sees them as a source for maybe jokes, maybe a little bit of casual cruelty, and that's it. And he's not going to allow this guy to actually teach him, educate him about the topics, because these are, of course, real people. What happens to them medically actually matters. And so he tries to get in some good answers, but Clyde just steamrolls him. Take a look.
So I think he's right. I think Clyde steamrolls him in some sense. He was very commanding of the time, and he wouldn't let him answer the questions in the way that I think that Dr. Kumar wanted to answer the questions. There's an interesting question about whether or not he was justified in doing that, though, because it seemed like the way that Dr. Kumar was going to answer the questions was going to be to not answer the question. And I've seen people do that on the left and the right, actually, but I've seen people do that where they dodge questions and don't really answer them, or they substitute the question for another question that they think is more important, which is like the most pompous shit I've ever heard. I'm actually gonna give you an example of that later when it comes to Senator Hawley asking that one, I think she was from Berkeley, that one professor, about whether or not issues having to do with pregnancies were women's issues or not. and she says that, you know, his line of questioning is transphobic. So that era of pompousness that a lot of woke people have is the kind of thing, like, it's understandable for those of us who see through that shit to want to call it out and to not act like those people who are dodging questions are doing something innocent. Like they're usually not, but they're pretending to. So there's a little bit of an interesting question about to what extent that was that going on. Clearly, Dr. Kumar was a progressive, left-leaning type of person, and so his hostility to the way that the question was asked in a way that does not favor his side and his political leanings and his presuppositions ideologically. It's an interesting question to what extent he's actually guilty of actually dodging the question. If there's a legitimate problem with those questions, then I think that it would be better to identify them. And I know that in the heat of the moment, given the context of that hearing, he may not have been, you know, readily able to do that, and he may have just intuited it, and it may not have been like explicitly clear to him in his mind even. But like right now, the Young Turks are actually giving commentary on it. Like I actually think they would probably be more substantive for them to actually like evaluate that. But it seems like this dude right here, whose name I forget, he has all these kinds of presuppositions. He basically is impugning the motives of Clyde in the sense that Representative Clyde, in the sense that he's saying that the Representative Clyde doesn't give a damn about trans people. He hates trans people. That's a bit of a presumption. I don't know that Representative Clyde hates trans people or doesn't give a damn about trans people, or is maybe like just kind of blasé about trans people. But like, it seems like he was trying to address a particular set of issues that, given the ideological presuppositions of conservatives, it makes sense why he would prioritize those things. Because fundamentally, it seems like the conservative types view doctors like Dr. Kumar as making the problems worse that they're trying to address with these abortion bans. And the fundamental problem that they're trying to address is that they don't want people murdering babies in the womb and under the false pretense of healthcare. That's the way to state with the most accurate fidelity of what they actually think of what they're doing. People like the members of the Young Turks, however, the more progressive types, what they fundamentally view themselves as doing is ensuring that vulnerable people like pregnant women who do not want pregnancies, who can't take care of their child because of poverty, because they're not ready, because of lack of emotional maturity, etc., or because the pregnancy in question is the product of abuse of various forms, including but not limited to rape or incest, or who are suffering from the complications of ectopic pregnancies, that they can get the much needed medical care that they need, and including but not limited to abortion procedures, which the contention of people left of center is that these kinds of procedures are the remedy to these kinds of situations. And so, and I guess implied by that is fundamentally they do not view these procedures as in any way, shape, or form entailing something as morally reprehensible as murder, because all they're doing is removing genetic material from certain parts of a woman's anatomy at her behest. And she has the ultimate say about what gets to stay in her body and what does not. There's nothing further to consider on this view. There's no other further morally relevant considerations on this view. So I think that's the way to summarize that view with the utmost fidelity as well. Okay, so let's move on and listen to him bash Clyde more.
Right, and I'm answering the question. Somebody with a uterus may have the capability of becoming pregnant, whether they're a woman or a man. That doesn't make a difference.
Okay, we're done.
Not
we're
every
done.
person with a
this
uterus
isn't complicated.
has the ability.
Let me
to become
tell you,
pregnant.
if a person has
This
a
is
uterus
medicine.
and is born female, they are a woman. That is not a man, and the vast majority of the world considers that to be a woman because there are biological differences between men and women.
Okay, so just to really clarify how little he actually cares about this, he knew the line he was supposed to deliver. It wasn't supposed to be about care. It wasn't supposed to be about ensuring that people live through pregnancy or anything like that. It was to just say who gets to be a woman or not. And he cares so little about it that he had to write it down. This is a.
Well, I don't know. There's a lot of presumption going on there. I will say that to stimulate him somewhat, I do think that Clyde did operate in such a way where he didn't seem to be as interested in the same kinds of topics that Dr. Kumar was interested in. I think that that's true. I think that there may have been a little bit of dismissiveness in his mode of engagement, for sure. He was very authoritative and assertive, for sure, and that's off-putting, particularly from the point of view of a progressive that has all of the kinds of presuppositions that I articulated before. So I get that. I get why he feels some type of way about that, to be fair. To what extent does Representative Clyde care about pregnant women? So there may be some fair criticism about he doesn't seem to care about them, at least not in the way that a lot of liberal types do. Their whole thing is that we care about these pregnant women insofar as they need to get the relevant health care that they need. And if they're pregnant and they don't want their pregnancies, then the relevant healthcare that they need is going to entail abortion procedures. And so we need to get them the abortions that they need, because fundamentally abortion is just healthcare. That's the contention. That's the presupposition. That's the starting point. So we care in the sense, if you're progressive, we care in the sense that these pregnant women who are now deprived of that very vital healthcare that they're going to need in states like Texas, where the no good, very bad, evil Republicans have made it impossible for them to get that healthcare, We need to make sure that we advocate on their behalf so that they can get that health care. And from this point of view, that's a legitimate grievance. So it doesn't seem like Clyde is concerned with that. And so labeling him as if he doesn't care makes a little bit more sense if you view it, if you just naively view it like that, nothing else considered other than what I just said. On the other hand, if you're coming from the philosophical starting point of most conservatives, and fundamentally what you regard the abortion procedure as is a form of murder that is not justified, because what it's doing is murdering infants before they are even born, right? And you view it as morally reprehensible, as infanticide, right? Then you're not fundamentally regarding that procedure as something as innocuous as healthcare. You're regarding it as something inherently pernicious, because what you're doing is masking something like that's akin to murder of a child as though it's something innocuous when it's not, which makes it all the more pernicious. And so if that's your core contention, then you're not going to be as concerned with the relevant woman in question who's seeking the procedure that you regard as akin to murder, because it's fundamentally they're seeking that you're against. So if you frame a person who's coming from that perspective as not caring about the woman, to a certain extent, that's disingenuous, because it's not taking into account their philosophical starting points. Now you can disagree with their philosophical starting points. I think that would be more honest. But acting like that's not what's going on, acting like that's not a fundamental difference in the way that they're perceiving what's happening versus the way that you're perceiving what's happening, is disingenuous as fuck. And it makes them equally as disingenuous as they are declaring or presuming that Clyde is. Like, at the very least, you can recognize the other point of view without agreeing with it, can't you? Is that allowed? But I guess acknowledging that there are other points of view makes potentially your point of view seem less tenable, particularly if the other point of view is more persuasive. That might be a reason why they don't do it. Or they're just so pompous and smug in their certainty of their own position, that they just are just really dismissive of any other point of view. It's another possibility. And this is part and parcel of dogmatism, by the way. People who are dogmatic don't typically look at things from other people's point of view. And it's funny because it's the dogmatism of the Christian fundamentalist types that people like members of the Young Turks vehemently object to, yet they mirror it with respect to their own ideological precepts. It's crazy.
Woman, that's who I think is well. He can't even do it extemporaneously. He had to read it off of a piece of paper. Now we're gonna have a great response to Clyde and his condescending approach to that conversation from AOC.
Like the admonishment of his condescension. And to be fair, I think there was some kind of condescension there, for sure. I think he was condescending in his mode of engagement with Dr. Kumar. I think if you're going to be objective, you have to acknowledge that. I think Dr. Kumar was in some sense kind of condescending right back, but the power dynamics are different because he was in control in some sense. Dr. Clyde was in control in terms of like being able to reclaim his time and stopping him from speaking. So the power dynamics weren't equal. But what kills me is that this dude is being smug and pompous and also condescending towards Clyde, and that seems lost on him. But maybe he's not trying to come off that way. Maybe he's accidentally coming off that way because he's genuinely appalled by what he perceived to be intellectually dishonest engagement. Maybe to be fair to him.
In just a sec, but first I wanted to give you a chance to jump in.
Yeah, so let me break it down for the right wing, because
all right, so that shit right there. So Jank, he's already coming off hella smug and pompous about this shit. Let me teach you, you dumb right wingers. He didn't say that, but that's kind of how he's coming off. I'm gonna let him spit, and then I'm gonna come back and respond to it, because everything he's about to say, I have fundamental problems with. But go ahead.
I'm not sure anybody's ever explained it to them in this very clear way. And although God knows a lot of people have tried, right? And then we'll see why they care, okay? So some people are born as women and they have a uterus, but they think and they feel that they are men. And so some of them transition to becoming men. but they still have their uterus, so they can get pregnant. And so that explains it. It's actually super simple.
So what's slightly ironic about that kind of condescending explanation is it seemed like that's exactly what Representative Clyde articulated when he tried to clarify in his slightly condescending question to Dr. Kumar.
Birth.
He's like, what do you
So are you saying that a biological female who identifies as a man and therefore becomes pregnant is, quote, a man? Is that what you're saying?
He's like, what do you mean men can get pregnant? Do you mean that there are people who are women who transition to being men and they maintain their uterus, and insofar as they do that, they can get pregnant? Is that what you mean? Like he almost basically said what Jake just explained. So like this weird condescending implication that the no good, very bad, evil Republicans such as Clyde don't grasp this or don't understand this, and that ignorance or lack of understanding undergirds their fundamental disagreement with trans ideology doesn't seem fair. And it's all the more ironic because it kind of was demonstrably proven false by Clyde literally explaining or articulating in no uncertain terms what he just explained.
So some people are born as women and they have a uterus, but they think and they feel that they are men. And so some of them transition to becoming men. But they still have their uterus, so they can get pregnant. And so that explains it. It's actually super simple, right?
So are you saying that a biological female who identifies as a man and therefore becomes pregnant is, quote, a man? Is that what you're saying?
These questions.
And he literally just watched it. They literally just showed it to their audience. So that's weird. But okay, let's move on and see what else he says.
Right? But I don't know why you guys don't believe them. Do you get that that's super weird that you don't believe them? Like, oh, you think like that you're actually a man and you feel that way. I don't believe you.
What's this point about belief? I actually am caught off guard by that. I didn't expect him to go down that road. So, and I watched this before, so I'm now recalling it. But like I felt this way the first time I saw it, which was like, what's all the stuff about belief, bro? Belief isn't sacred. Like people can make claims about themselves that are wrong, even though they genuinely believe them to be true. Right? Like why are you acting like just because a person says that they're a woman like, is there some kind of moral obligation to believe them? Is that what progressives think? That there's some kind of moral duty to believe a person who asserts claims about who they are or what they are? Because that's the kind of claim a person can be wrong about, clearly. Right? Like, do I have to give examples? So this is the example I'm going to borrow from Ben Shapiro that I heard recently. So an anorexic person is the person who genuinely believes that they are overweight when in fact they are not overweight at all and probably are underweight to the point of like almost dying and malnourished, right? They're objectively not what they think that they are. And they may assert that they're fat or overweight and maybe genuinely expressing something that they genuinely believe with respect to themselves that is wrong, though. Just because a person genuinely expresses a thing about themselves doesn't make it true. Like and so like with respect to one's identity categories, like I mean, I might have to play a little science fiction or whatever to come up with a case that is plausible, but I bet I probably could come up with a case where a person makes an analogous mistake with respect to their own racial identity and an analogous mistake with respect to their own gender identity. I think the core contention of the conservative types is that actually what a trans person is doing, even though they genuinely say they're biologically male, but they feel like they're a woman trapped in a man's body and they undergo whatever is a part of their transition. And then they kind of declare by fiat that they're a woman after the fact. They're a trans woman, or maybe they're just a woman. They don't feel a need to qualify the womanness. They're just a woman. Like that's the kind of claim a person can still be wrong about. though, and it would depend on the objective criteria of correctness. If the criteria of correctness is biological and they don't fit the biological criteria, then they could be wrong. If the criteria of correctness is the inner feeling and nothing else, then it would be impossible for them to be wrong. And so what I'm starting to wonder is if progressives think that the criteria of correctness is merely the inner feeling. And if that's true, then I guess whatever you then I guess in some sense it becomes impossible for you to be wrong about it, because it's all about the inner feeling. It would be something akin to like pain. Like, how can a person who genuinely feels pain be wrong that they're in pain? It would be something like that. And so how can a person who genuinely feels that they're a woman, insofar as that's what determines your womanhood, be wrong in their assertion that they're a woman? I think that progressives think about it like that, but that's weird, because that would imply that being a woman or being a man have nothing to do with biology, and that shit makes no sense, or at least there's an argument that doesn't make any sense. So if that's what progressives really think, then that's an extremely untenable position. So I'm a man not because of my biology, but because I feel I'm a man. But like, before I even had that inner sense of manhood, presumably when I was really, really young, and these concepts, I didn't even grasp these concepts as an infant. Was I not a man then? At what point did I become a man? I thought I was born a male. I thought that was something that was true from birth. I thought I was male in the womb. In fact, if you would have performed the relevant, ultrasound or whatever, or the relevant, genetic test or whatever, you could have determined my maleness early on, way before I was born, before I was even done developing. You could have probably, found the Y chromosome, if and determined that, DSDs aside, that I was biologically male. You probably could have did that way before I was even born. But like, how could I have a feeling that I was a man before I was born? To what extent do unborn fetuses have feelings? And if you're pro-abortion, do you want to admit that unborn fetuses have feelings? Is that something you want to admit? These are just questions. These are questions I don't think I'm ever going to get answers to, by the way, from progressive types, because I don't think they've thought very hard about these things. But look at me. Now I'm being smug. Go figure. Happens to the best of us.
What a weird thing. I'm a Steelers fan. I don't believe you. Why don't you believe me? Why?
Is the claim that one is a Steelers fan the same fundamentally as the claim that one is a woman? I mean, it's a declaration about what you are in some sense. You're identifying yourself as something. But the criteria of correctness doesn't entail anything with respect to one's biology. So maybe that's why he thinks it's a good analogy. Like, if I'm a fan of a team, the criteria of correctness has nothing to do with my genetics. It has everything to do with my fanaticism, with my affinity for, the relevant team in question. And so is he thinking about one's gender identity as something like that? Is like claiming fandom for a team? It's like my affinity towards womanhood is the only thing that is requisite for that. And I just declare or assert that by fiat. Is that how it works? Is that the contention? The more I elaborate on this, the less tenable it seems. Huh.
Why would I lie about that? And saying that, hey, I feel like a man, that I'm a man mentally, psychologically, and so I'm going to transition to being a man. That's not being a Steelers fan. That's much more difficult.
Okay, so at least he recognized that there's a difference. But then I don't understand the point of the comparison then. So maybe I'm just misunderstanding fundamentally what he's saying. So I want to be charitable. I don't want to. Maybe he's not articulating himself quite well, or maybe I'm just failing to understand him. But what if? But if a person felt like they were like a bird or some shit, would that make them a bird? You know what I mean? And then and if you say no, but you're willing to allow the gender thing, then what's the difference then? Is it because the criteria for correctness for being a bird is genetic, but the criteria for correctness for being a woman isn't? Is that fundamentally what it is? Is there no biological basis to gender at all? Because I think that most progressives would argue that there's a biological basis to being a particular species. Like you can't just declare randomly that you're a cat or some shit. But then why wouldn't you allow that for race then? So why can't Rachel Dolezal be a black woman if she really feels it in her Caucasian bones? in her Negro / Caucasian bones. Like if like why can't you do that? Race is no less a social construct. It's not really clear why one can't feel dysphoria with respect to one's racial categories or identities. Why can't you do that? Why are liberal types and progressive types so hostile to that idea, but so accepting of it when it comes to gender? I genuinely don't get it. I genuinely don't get it.
That's much harder. And you got to put up with Neanderthals like Clyde. Your whole life, people filled with hate coming to you and saying, I don't believe you. I don't believe you. And I think you're bad. For what? I was born this way. You're immoral for being that.
Wait, but so people are born trans? Or in what sense are people born trans? Like okay, my understanding was what part of what makes a person trans or maybe even non-binary is that they experience the gender dysphoria. They feel there's this inner sense of self, and they feel more feminine than I guess one would expect from somebody who's biologically male, or they feel more masculine than I guess one would expect if from a biological female. And so they feel that they're a woman trapped in a man's body or a man trapped in that their body parts don't match what they are. That's right. But like, it doesn't seem like it's possible for a newborn infant to feel that. It seems like they would need to have grasped certain concepts in order to even make that intelligible to them. And so it's very weird to say that you're born that way. Maybe you're born with the latent potential to experience those things, which you're not going to actually experience until later. Maybe something like that makes more sense to steelman it somewhat. So you're born with a propensity to experience gender dysphoria. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's what you mean. But I don't know how many people come out the womb experiencing gender dysphoria. Like, I think almost no one. I think literally no one comes out the womb feeling that way. And I guess it's possible though, because maybe they just don't have the ability to understand or grasp that they feel it that young, and they learn those things as they go. But maybe they always feel it on some level. But that's weird though. How could you feel like a woman trapped in a man's body if you had no concept for a man or a woman in the first place? Like as a newborn. How could you feel dysphoric like that without the basic concepts that would be requisite and for you to feel that way? Like there would have to be a certain basic amount of intelligibility for you to even experience that. And without the intelligibility, I don't know that newborn children can have the capacity to make that intelligible to themselves. So that's just a fascinating question. What is the youngest you can be and be trans? Because it doesn't seem like you can be trans in the womb, and it doesn't seem like you can be trans at birth. And there doesn't seem to be any genetic markers for being trans, or if there is, we haven't studied it well enough yet. Huh. Fascinating questions.
Born that way. Who would choose to do that? They do that because that's what they actually feel. But
I feel like that's fair. I feel like most trans people like are genuine. They're not making it up. They're not pretending to experience gender dysphoria. And the gender dysphoria is in some sense involuntary. Like they don't want to feel that way. it would be something like in that sense. I think the comparison to anorexia makes sense, because people who are anorexic, I don't think, want to feel like they're overweight when they're malnourished and underweight, in fact, right? But like, we recognize anorexia as a genuine mental disorder, though, and gender dysphoria up until I think 2013 was recognized as a mental illness, but now is not treated as such or recognized as such in the DSM-5. And there's interesting questions around that shift, but it seems to be motivated mostly by politics than anything medical or psychological. It seems to be motivated by a conviction that people of these identities are just being discriminated against, and pathologizing them constitutes a particular manifestation of forms of oppression that other members of the LGBTQ community have historically faced. Once upon a time, to be gay or lesbian, it was the kind of thing that you could be committed for, and you could be subject to all kinds of like shock therapies and shit. And we regard that as a travesty against those communities now, to have pathologized them as having mental illnesses in the past. And so maybe doing that with respect to trans people, I think the conviction is that we're guilty of an analogous kind of flaw in our understanding of these identities. But still, I like, there does seem to be something inescapably delusionary about regarding oneself as something that they're not. And the irony is part of the irony of these identities is that what is regarded as being one's true self is adapting and changing and quote unquote transitioning to so to speak more to fit with more fidelity what you feel you are, as opposed to what your body appears as, or what your kind of, secondary sex characteristics in fact are. And so to be true to yourself is to change yourself to fit your feeling. And there's a kind of irony there, because like, there's a weird game being played here about whether or not the criteria of correctness, that is the things that determine the fact of the matter or the truth of the matter, are independent of one's subjective feelings, or are determined either solely or primarily by one's subjective feelings. And the way that this discourse gets discussed is, it seems fairly obvious that people are of the conviction that one's subjective feeling of themselves determines their gender identity and nothing else. And in fact, to embrace the idea that anything about one's genetics determines this is to embrace a problematic, dare I say, oppressive ideology. To embrace biological determinism is actually argued by a lot of radical types as in some sense a hallmark of patriarchy or white supremacy or some shit. That paradigm is instrumental in maintaining certain problematic hierarchies that keep certain groups of people down, or so it is argued. So I don't know, man. Like, the shit is wild, just because the logic of it is flipped on its head in a lot of subtle ways. If you like get under the hood and get into the ideology of it, and in ways that just are antithetical to rationality and logic in a lot of ways, it seems. Even while pretending to be the most logical or rational. That's what's crazy. That's what's the most kind of bizarre about it. But definitely, I think that there's an appeal to compassion, and that's what it seems like Cenk is doing right now. A lot of these arguments don't really appeal to logic or logical consistency or objectivity. They appeal to compassion and subjective feelings, but they act like they're the most commonsensical or rational to do that. There's nothing logical or rational about that at all. At least in given the ways in which these people tend to argue, there isn't. I do think, to steel man them a little bit, I do think that the compassionate impulse to have a genuine desire to want for people to be treated with humanity and dignity, I think there are rational grounds for that, for sure. But a lot of people don't appeal to that on rational grounds. It's kind of a warm, fuzzy feeling. It's like, no, like we owe it to people to like respect their humanity and their dignity, and they get caught up kind of in the emotion of it. And there is a aspect of our moral lives where we experience on some emotional level visceral reactions to things that we think are morally reprehensible, from our kind of moral disgust to our kind of more warm, fuzzy, celebratory feeling when we think that justice has been served and wrongs have been righted. We do experience that on an emotional level, but I don't think that the emotions determine in any objective way the veracity of our moral claims. That's what I object to. And it seems like conceptions like this seem to make it seem like the veracity of moral claims are determined by feelings, or at least the veracity of claims with respect to one's subjective identity, their gender identity, let's say, are determined by their feelings. That's one manifestation of this. And I think I just fundamentally reject that entirely, on philosophical grounds. We wouldn't accept that in science, would we? We wouldn't accept that maybe in the legal domain, would we? We wouldn't accept that in terms of rational arguments, would we? So why do we keep making these exceptions when it comes to these things? I don't know, man. I guess I'm not supposed to know.
Right wingers are right now, all across the country are going, no, if you feel that way, we're going to say we don't believe you, and we're going to hate you in every possible way, and we're going to pass laws against you.
I can't think of a single conservative who has said that they're going to hate trans people because they don't believe them. I can't think of a single example of that. Maybe Jake is saying that they're saying it with their actions, like their actions imply that they hate them. That only a person would only act in ways that conservatives typically act if they're motivated by some kind of hatred towards trans people or resentment towards them or something like that. I just think that's an overly simplistic way of understanding people who differ from you, no matter what side of the spectrum you're on. If you think that people differ from you and the only explanation or the primary explanation for the reason why they disagree with you is because they hate you or something about you, I don't think you're mature in your thinking about these things. That never made sense to me. I think that there's all kinds of complex, there's all sorts of possible reasons that vary in complexity why a person might disagree with the core contentions of trans people that have nothing to do with hatred or some kind of hostility, like genuine dislike or disdain for them. You just disagree with people. You don't have to, that doesn't mean you hate them. Right? I don't know, man. I don't know. Do Republicans think that? I mean, yeah. So Republicans do this too. So Republicans often say things like leftists, who deviate from their kinds of conceptions of patriotism and American values, hate America, and the only reason why they do what they do is because they really hate America. The only reason why they promote socialism and communism or whatever or wokeness is because they hate America. The only reason why they're trying to trans the kids is because they hate America. The only reason why they're taking a knee during the national anthem is because they hate America. The only reason why they protest capitalism is because they hate America. And it's like, I would even, I have an analogous criticism for that. I was just like, dude, like, you think the only possible explanation for people disagreeing with all of these things that you value and like kind of without question and uncritically is that they hate your country? Like what? I like that never made like from both sides, that kind of shit that's never made sense to me. Like I understand if you're trying to do this us versus them and you're trying to reify that and you're saying like, hey, they're against us. You know why? Because they hate you. Like I get how that's functional and serving that purpose. But like if you have there's a basic amount of scrutiny to that, it seems to become very stupid very fast. So I don't know why Cenk makes these appeals. I don't know why progressives generally make these appeals. Everybody who disagrees with you is not motivated by hate. Like, get over yourselves.
We're going to say, so you don't get the same rights as everyone else. Why? Why do you care? There's something about it that bothers them. And what it is two things. One is, let's be honest, I know it's going to bother a lot of people and it's going to offend some people, but our job is to tell you the truth. Yes, it's of course partly religion. It's a giant part of it. Religion teaches you to hate gay people.
Our job is to tell you the truth. Well, I mean, okay, to be fair, I think that they are trying to tell the truth as they see it. They're fallible, so sometimes they're going to make truth claims that are in fact false, but they don't know it because of various different reasons. And the same reasons that, you know, why everybody does that kind of thing, including me from time to time, which is that we are mistaken, we misunderstand things, we get things wrong, we're misinformed, we have blind spots, we misconstrue things, etc. So I chuckled, but I'm trying to be gracious because there's no person, including myself, who's going to get everything right all the time, even when they're trying to be careful, and even when they're trying to cite their sources, and even when they're trying to be informed. I guess I just scoffed at the idea that he thinks of himself as better at truth telling than the people he disagrees with. I don't know how true that is. I'll just say it like that. And to be fair, I would apply that to myself. I genuinely believe, but I could be wrong about this. I genuinely believe that I'm probably better at telling the truth than the Young Turks, but mostly because I think that they're hella biased. Like their bias is like fucking very well pronounced. But that's the kind of thing I could be wrong about. Maybe I have blind spots to the ways with which I get things wrong more often than I believe that I do. I think he certainly is making that mistake, and so I'm just as susceptible or liable to be making that mistake as well. I don't necessarily have a reputation to keep, so that's a particular kind of source of bias that I'm not worried about, that I think he has to deal with because he's more prominent than me. Maybe if I ever got to a point where I was more prominent, maybe that would start to become an issue. I don't know, kind of maintain my rep or whatever. That might determine what kind of topics I cover, because if I have a significant, let's say I got to the point where I had like 80% of my audience was left leaning, and with that came a whole bunch of expectations around what my view should be, because I might lose my audience and that might have implications for my income, then I would have all kinds of corrupting influences on my opinion, right? And I think that people like Cenk have those things. For the reasons just given that I just tried to, briefly describe or summarize. I think people like Ben Shapiro have those things as well. I have right now, because I have like all of 10 followers, I don't have to worry about that type of shit. And so I can be way more honest. But the fact that I can be honest about what I actually think doesn't necessarily even make what I say true. I think I'm only as good at deciphering truth from falsehood as I'm good at informing myself. So it's limited, and also it's filtered through the limitations of my understanding, my lack of expertise, etc. Because I don't know everything, and there's a lot of things I have never studied in any formal sense, and so I speak kind of on the edge of my understanding on a lot of these things, to be fair. I'm not an expert in all things having to do with healthcare and abortion. I'm not an expert in all things having to do with trans rights and the kinds of issues that they face. I'm not a trans person, so I don't have direct experience with it. All of my quote unquote experience with trans people have been indirect. talking with trans and non-binary people briefly, and to be fair, a lot of trans and non-binary people do not feel comfortable kind of voicing some of the more intimate aspects of their experience with complete strangers or with people who they have good reason to believe are going to disagree with their identity, and or maybe be hostile to them in virtue of it. So how well informed can I be on trans issues in terms of the nuances and the idiosyncrasies of what it's like to live as such? I think it's very limited, because I have very limited access to trans people who are willing to be open about that. And it's hard to be open about a lot of that shit, because a lot of that stuff they're trying to figure out in the first place. So being able to articulate it to somebody else is hard for that reason. But also, like, I don't know, how open are you to telling the most intimate parts of yourself with other people in general, even people who are close to you? Like, that's not a plaything. So I'm not trying to present myself as an expert on trans issues, but I am genuinely and in good faith questioning things. And even though I recognize the potential to do some damage or some harm there, I think that the benefits that come with actually being bold enough and brave enough to actually ask genuine questions that you genuinely have outweigh the risks. And I mean that across the board, not just with respect to trans issues and trans identity, but with respect to race issues and race identity, even those that implicate me and my own race. I ask all kinds of questions with respect to my own race and my own racial identity all the time in the same way. And I think that our discourse would be better served by people who are willing to do that. We should question ourselves, excuse me, as much as we question other people. Like I'm questioning the Young Turks right now. But anyway.
People. Don't tell me it doesn't. Some of you it doesn't. Some of you have wonderful sects of your religion that are open and caring and understand the message of Jesus and Muhammad, etc., and one of love and inclusivity, right? But a lot of religious people don't feel that way, and you know it. So the right-wing evangelical leaders spread. And so I don't care if they catch feelings over it. I don't care if CNN says, oh, you're not allowed on TV because you've offended a portion of our audience. They spread hate, this poison, throughout the land. They say, if you see someone like this, demean them. Say they're less than you. Say
Again, I can't think of a single example of a Republican that has said something like that. Maybe there are people on the right that are not necessarily politicians who've said that. That wouldn't surprise me. People say crazy and wild shit on all sides of the political aisle, so I wouldn't put it past them. But I don't know how prevalent that is. He's making it sound like all Republicans think this, and I don't know how true that is at all. There's going to be a part where they're going to talk about ALC, and I'm going to try to skip through it because we saw it already. But I do want to hear their commentary on it.
They should have less rights than you, and that we should all hate you and not even believe you. Not even believe you.
Why does he keep emphasizing the belief thing? Like that's a big deal. Like giving not so like subordinating people and not giving them the same rights. I think that's like, if that were actually happening, like that would be bad. That makes sense. Hating people in the way that he means, where there's all kinds of political implications to it, I think that that's bad, because it basically weaponizes prejudice, particularly if the hatred is inculcated into like the structures of our society. But not believing a person, like why is he talking about that in the same vein, like it's the same level of moral atrocity? Like not believing a person is not like there's nothing morally reprehensible necessarily about not believing someone. Like I don't know, man. Like particularly when the claims that they are making is the kind of thing that they can be wrong about. And so I guess this would only make sense if you regarded a claim of a person saying that they're a woman or a man being essentially an infallible claim, that like it's the kind of claim you could never be wrong about. and so in virtue of that, there would never be a legitimate basis to question the claim. Right? Like is that genuinely how progressives view gender identity claims? Is that they are infallible in effect? I genuinely want to know the answer to that question. How many progressives genuinely believe that gender identity claims are infallible? You can never be wrong. You can never be wrong about that, insofar as you genuinely assert it. And I mean, even over and above that, a person could lie. So, like, even if they genuinely believe themselves to be a man, but for whatever reason they wanted, there was some kind of benefit in pretending to be a woman. Like, how would you know whether they were lying or not? And so, insofar as that's possible, then that would be a rational basis to not believe a person, insofar as they might be lying, right? So I guess you'd have to say, like, insofar as you had no rational basis to believe that they were lying, then you have to believe them. Is that, like, maybe that's what they mean? I don't know. This kind of thing came up actually in that it was subtle, but it came up in that What is a Woman documentary, when Matt Walsh went to visit that professor from the University of Tennessee.
We're talking about gender and sex, and there's a lot of controversies there. If we're talking about a trans woman has all of the male physical characteristics, so would that not be a male then? Couldn't we plainly say this person is a male?
Well, I guess it's like, why are you asking the question? I think I want to understand sort of why that's so important. So if someone tells
Just
you...
to sort of understand reality,
Well, I mean, I think when someone tells you who they are, you should believe them. So if a person says that they're a woman or they're a man, then that's them telling you their gender is. I'm not so sure what social interactions would have to do with maleness or femaleness that would be...
I'm not even talking about social context. I'm just trying to start by getting to the truth,
Yeah, I mean, I'm really uncomfortable with that language of like getting to the truth. Again, in social life.
Why is that uncomfortable?
Because it sounds actually deeply transphobic to me. And if you keep probing, we're gonna stop the interview.
If I probe about what the truth is?
You keep invoking the word truth, which is condescending and rude. I'm saying to you...
How is the word truth condescending and rude?
Why don't you tell me what your truth is, and you're walking on 30 seconds more of thin ice before I get up.
What my truth is? Well, I don't think I really have a truth. I think that there's just the truth, like the reality. And so we should begin by trying to figure out what the reality is.
And why are you concerned with when someone else tells you that they're a man, or even if they use the word male, why are you concerned with not believing them?
Well, you keep bringing it back to, how do you respond in a social situation? But,
that's what I do. I'm a social scientist.
Well, right, but we're in a university. This is a place of understanding truth, isn't it? Or
absolutely, we pursue truth, and I'm a social scientist, and that's what I do.
But you just said the truth is transphobic.
That you would say, if you're saying the truth is that I get to say, you're not a man, show me your genitalia, that's transphobic.
No, I don't want to see anybody's genitalia. I just mean, someone can make a statement about themselves that could be untrue. Like, for example, if I were to say that I'm a black man, would you accept that, or would you be skeptical?
Are you black? Are you African American? Are you biracial?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, you don't look that, and I don't think it doesn't sound like that's a genuine statement of who you are.
Okay, so that's my point. I could make a statement about who I am that's incorrect.
Of course, I think it's well established that human beings can lie, yes.
Or not even lie. I mean, I could just be mistaken.
Yeah.
Sure
where you're going.
And he at one point asked him, like, I don't understand why when a person tells you who they are, why you don't believe them, as if that constituted some kind of moral failure. And I actually thought that was a weird way to ask the question. But now that I'm kind of unpacking this, I'm starting to see a pattern. I'm starting to see that there seems to be at least a subset of people who buy into all of this that genuinely think that not believing a person's assertions of their gender identity is somehow itself constitutive of some kind of travesty against them. That's strange to me. I would love to have somebody articulate that clearly, who somebody who genuinely believes that, why that is the case exactly. What is so inherently harmful about not believing a claim like that, insofar as it could possibly be wrong, or insofar as a person could be lying about that? And then what Matt ended up doing, demonstrating that actually it doesn't really make sense to just take their word for it necessarily, is he made an analogy. He gave the example, like, what if I said I was a black man? And then the dude hesitated, because I think on some level he understood that there was a possibility he was going to contradict himself. It was like, well, are you African American? He was like, not that I know of. He was like, okay, well, yeah. Oh, it doesn't seem like that's a genuine statement of who you are. And I'm like, and then Matt just kind of looked at him and goes, well, yeah, but that's my point. But like, yeah. He's like, well, yeah, people can lie. And he's like, well, no, not even just lie. Like what if I was in error? And he's like, yeah. And then he goes, yeah, but I don't see where you're going with that. And it was just like the bearing that had on that entire exchange was lost on this college professor. That was weird, because it was just like, well, dude, like, I mean, if we have to spell it out for you, like, that undermines the idea that you owe it to people to like believe them just because they say something, because in at least some cases it's at least conceivable that the statement isn't true, either because the person is in error or because the person is misleading you. Whichever one you want to pick, those are two different kinds of scenarios under which a person making such an identity claim with respect to themselves would be wrong, and that would justify, at least in principle, not believing them, right? Like, that undermines this idea that you owe it to a person to just take their word for it. Like, what kind of weird honor system is that? People have talked in this vein when it comes to people's claims of sexual assault, right? So they make an accusation or allegation of sexual assault against the person, and so the Believe All Women crowd made it seem like we had some kind of moral obligation to just believe them. It's like, why? Motherfuckers lie about that type of shit. That's the kind of shit a person can be wrong about. Why would you, what forms a rational basis for there to be an obligation to believe that? How are we failing morally if we don't just take their word for it? How are we not guilty of being in some sense irresponsible, particularly in the context of the court of law, if we just willy-nilly take their word for it? There's all kind of implications, very serious ones, for the parties involved if we take their word for it. So we can't just take their word for it. And there's an analogous kind of argument you can give with respect to these gender identity claims. There's all kinds of implications in society for what we owe you and have to accommodate for you in terms of public accommodations and stuff like that if you are in fact a woman. And so you claim that you are a woman kind of matters for those reasons. And so for us to just take your word for it is in some sense irresponsible, or at least in certain contexts. But I digress.
And by the way, the right wing does this to everybody. African Americans say, hey, cops have been beating us up for hundreds of years. They go, I don't believe you. You made it up.
Yep.
Think about how.
Okay, so to be fair, there are Republicans who deny that, Candace Owens being one of them, who denies emphatically that that America's racist, and they tend to have a lot of pushback when there's any particular allegation that a police officer is guilty of police brutality because they shot someone, particularly an unarmed person. I think that Jake is not being as thorough in addressing this issue as he could, because in at least some of the cases, the allegations turned out not to be valid. So I'm thinking Michael Brown, heads up, don't shoot. That facet of the narrative was wrong. The another one might be Jacob Blake. People thought that because he was shot in the back 7 times, that somehow implied that he was unarmed. And the idea that he got shot in the back means that he had his back turned, and so couldn't have been a threat, or was less of a threat because he had his back turned, and connoted some kind of innocence. And therefore, him getting shot in the back 7 times, which apparently was viewed as excessive, because in a vacuum, getting shot in the back 7 times seems, or particularly if you have all these kind of narratives operating in the background in your mind about, how trigger happy police are and how evil they are, fuck 12 and all cops are bastards and all that, then I understand the impulse to want to object vehemently to that. But when you when you see all the details and you see the footage of him resisting arrest and also like the reason why his ex-girlfriend called the cops on him in the first place, that she had been digitally raped and penetrated by him without her consent, and then he was in the process of stealing a vehicle that she owned with her kids in the car and basically kidnapping his own kids because he wasn't supposed to have them or some shit. Like, and he was tased twice and still resisted arrest and had a knife in his hand. Like, if you like, all of those details kind of complicate things like a little bit. It's really hard to maintain this conception of Jacob Blake as just an innocent bystander, and then the cops just showed up and shot this nigga in the back 7 times when you know all of those details. Like, there were clearly attempts to apprehend him without shooting him that didn't go well. And it's really hard to maintain that the cops should have did more. It's like the motherfuckers tased this motherfucker twice. They gave him lawful orders that he resisted. He was going towards the driver's side of the car, right? He was about to flee the scene, right? Like if you're going to be objective, right? Like, come on. It's just really hard to maintain that narrative when you know all those details. But a lot of people who to this day still talking that Jacob Blake shit don't know these details at all. They have no idea that this dude is accused of raping someone with his fingers. And what's up with the believe all women crowd on that one? Like, it's just like the blaring holes and inconsistencies are obvious, that it's almost laughable, right? But yet, if you point this out, then you get accused of being Uncle Tom or some shit, or like you're defending police. It's like, bro, like we got to evaluate these things objectively, bro. We can't be led astray by our feelings and emotions on this shit, man. But again, I digress.
Insanely offensive that is. And forget about, oh, hey, did we offend them or not? Think about it if it was you. If it was you. You're a white right-winger and you say, hey, I think this. Oh, in fact, you know it. And on a thing that you shouldn't get offended over. You deeply believe that in Jesus Christ, and a lot of you evangelical right-wingers, you deeply believe that Jesus Christ was a hateful figure. He hated gay people. He hated trans people. He hated poor people. He loved rich people. And when I tell you that's a myth that doesn't exist, oh my God, you get so angry. And you go, why won't you believe me that Jesus is real and that he thinks these things? So can you not empathize with people who go, can you not believe me on something much more benign, that I actually think these things about myself?
I don't know how benign it is, because there's all kinds of implications that implicate certain groups in our society. Particularly, one case in point is the preservation of women's only spaces and the lack of safety that some women feel by having biological males complete with their full male anatomy in those spaces, i.e. We Spa in LA. So there's wider implications here. There's also the implications about biological males competing against women, biological women, or cis women. So these would be trans women who are biologically male competing against cis women who are biologically female in various different sports, where they have all of the physical advantages that they get to utilize in the domain of competition that those sports entail, from being biologically male, that gives them a competitive advantage, right? And in some cases, like with combat sports, they can do like significant damage to the women in question, like break their skulls. And that has actually literally happened. So like there are wider implications here that I think people, like, you can draw a blind eye to and become naive about, but like we can't ignore those and act like those are the things that make this not benign. Those are the things that make this actually a legitimate controversy, to be fair. But you could maybe underscore how rare those things are on the whole. I mean, you've even had situations where trans women were put in women's prisons and then ended up impregnating cis women. Like, and it's not clear that the sex was consensual, by the way. So like I mean, like, these are things that you need to consider if you're going to take these policy positions seriously. There are wider implications here. that need to be taken seriously. The other thing is, I like the idea that Jesus hates gays. Like, I guess that's something that you can derive from the way that God generally in the Bible treats gays and homosexuality and the forms of punishment and stuff like that. That kind of behavior comes off as extremeful towards those groups of people. I think that that's fair. Smiting entire like civilizations like Sodom and Gomorrah because the people there were engaging in homosexuality or homosexual activity. That seems to connote that there's a high degree of animosity towards those groups of people for those because of those sexual proclivities or whatever. They're seen as unclean, unholy, in these traditions. So I think that there's some fairness to that, to steelman it. I don't know how many contemporary Christians think that God or Jesus hates gays, because I think that their theological, it's more complicated than that. Their theological, man, it's been a while, but like their theological presuppositions have more to do with God as like being like a radical, like he loves everyone, but you have to repent in order to gain access to heaven or his forgiveness or something like that. And so gay people are just as eligible for that insofar as they dedicate themselves to God and turn away from sin. And so, but the contention of a lot of Christians is that to engage in homosexuality is the sin that you would have to turn away from. So if you're gay, you would have to not be gay. But like, what's controversial about that from the point of view of a gay person, and perhaps maybe even a gay believer, is that like my whole first of all, my sexuality is not something that I chose. I was born that way. That's a common contention. And secondly, there's nothing wrong about it. There's nothing morally reprehensible about it at all. Like I guess like I've heard gay people argue like what's wrong with being gay exactly? Like what's the morally reprehensible thing exactly? How's it any different from any other form of love or expression of love or amorous links for anybody else? Why is there a prejudice against a particular form of love? I think that's usually the kind of arguments given. So I understand the point about it being hateful and spiteful and things like that. That makes more sense to me. That's one of the reasons why I kind of not really deep in the church anymore, is because that was a constant source of contention. Because it has all kinds of implications for how you regard certain groups of people and how you treat people. And if you grow up in California, it's just not conducive to, how do you reconcile the contention that being gay is inherently sinful, yet treat gay people with the kind of dignity and humanity and respect that they are owed? And there's a kind of tension there that I think Jake is trying to speak to, although probably not as articulately as he could. But he's gesturing at it good enough. Like I think we get what he means. All right, let me go back to this.
And universally the right wing, because they are honestly the immoral people in this country, say no. I'm going to focus on hatred instead, and that's what you just saw.
This is exact.
Yeah, so that's just overly simplistic. But he's not wrong. Like, I'm trying to be more nuanced than him, but he's not wrong to point out that there's a problematic tension there, and it does involve the respecting the humanity of people, for sure. Couching that out in terms of hate is not the most articulate way to do it, because that makes it sound like Christians just have this kind of animosity towards gay people, and I don't think that a lot of them do. I think that a lot of Christians have this kind of theologically influenced sense of compassion, because fundamentally they think that all human beings are flawed, and they think that the particular flaw that gay people are guilty of is that they have a kind of deviant sexuality or something like that. But what's problematic about that is it's not really clear exactly what is supposed to be so morally repugnant about it, beyond the fact that it's explicitly prohibited in the Bible. That's not really an explanation or a reason. That's just a kind of declaration or a conviction. And it's the kind of thing that one could be wrong about. And so you're going to hold these kind of biblical principles and standards you're gonna hold people to that even when they don't buy into that. Like that seems unfair and wrong. And like I totally get why gay people don't appreciate that or approve of that, or people who are allies of theirs don't approve of that. I get that, but like, yeah, there's no way to account for those nuances though if you're just saying like, no, they just hate you. Like that's not quite accurate though. Some like Christian fundamentalists are very dismissive, and they're very abrasive, and they're very condemning. And you need to repent, little gay person, or whatever. Like I've actually seen Christian fundamentalist types go to like the corners, like street corners in San Francisco, and they get like a bullhorn or whatever, and because of free speech or whatever, they get to like say whatever the fuck they want to say, and they're like telling people they need to repent, and they'll point to gay people, people who are very flamboyant and kind of obviously gay, and just be like, you need to repent, gay boy, or whatever. And the gay people usually just kind of laugh it off or whatever. But like, I've seen that shit firsthand, and that shit's awkward. I'm like, what is happening? One time I was actually in New Orleans. This is a random thought. One time I was in New Orleans with some people from GFA, and then one of the people that was with us was gay, and it was kind of like obvious he wasn't. He kind of had like a gay aesthetic, if you know what I mean. Like he looked like a gay man. Like he looked like a gay man. I don't know how else to put it. He looked like a gay man. Like he looked like what you would expect to see if you were looking at a gay man. He kind of fit some of those stereotypes, and he in fact was gay. So there was this dude on this bullhorn, and he was like, doing his preaching thing, and then he kind of found this dude that he was with us. We were in a group, and he said something to the effect of, "You need to repent, little gay boy," or something like that. And a lot of us were kind of shocked, like, "Oh my god, I can't believe he said that." But the dude, the gay dude, just started like dancing. And it was the funniest shit ever. It kind of broke the tension and made it less awkward, kind of a little bit. But he didn't just dance though. He started grinding on the guy. So that kind of made it worse, but it was hilarious. But he didn't like touch him. He just got close enough to him to be like, kind of like, he didn't grind on him like as in touch him, but he kind of like, he did it without touching him, if that makes sense. And then I'm laughing at him. I was like, what did the guy say to you? And I don't remember exactly what he said. But I remember him saying some out of pocket shit. I was like, wow, he said that to you? He's like, yeah. And he said, that's why I just started grinding. This is like, yeah, I've had that happen to me. The dude said, I've had this happen to me before. And I was like, you know what? My whole attitude about it is like, don't get mad, just grind. That was the funniest thing ever. So that's just one example of me seeing what I'm talking about. To say that the person who's being all judgmental and proselytizing in the way that they're proselytizing is hateful of gay people is not quite accurate. I think that they are demeaning in some way. I think that they're definitely problematic. I think that they regard themselves as having a kind of moral superiority insofar as they are not gay over gay people. And perhaps you think that that's an unearned sense of moral superiority. Fair enough. I think that the case can be made for that. But it's not quite accurate to say that they hate them, particularly if they care enough about them to want to prompt them to change for the better, according to their theological presuppositions for the better. I know that's obnoxious to hear if you don't agree with that. Because if you hated a person, you wouldn't even care what happened to them. Like if you genuinely believed that a gay person was going to go to hell and burn forever and ever, and you genuinely hated them, why would you try to save them? Why would you try to prompt them to change their ways and quote unquote pray away the gay or whatever they think that whatever they think they're going to do to change them if you genuinely hated them? Like that's a genuine question. It's not rhetorical. Like why would you do that if you hated them? Like genuinely hated them. You know what I mean? So it's not quite accurate to say that they hate them. But that's kind of a shortcut for, I think, something that makes sense, which is that there's something problematic about that going on. And like the kind of unearned moral superiority that they're operating under needs to be questioned and criticized. And I think that's a better way to say it. Now, that doesn't quite flow off the tongue as well. And it doesn't capture the kind of moral outrage at religious people who do that towards gay people and think of gay people like this as saying that those people are hateful. It doesn't quite capture that, but it's more accurate though. And so what annoys me about hearing progressive types say this is that I think that they have a point and they're right to criticize it, but the way that they do it is not very helpful because they're fundamentally misconstruing the nature of things. They know that it's wrong, but they don't seem to clearly identify what's wrong with it. And that's kind of annoying because they're smart enough to, but whatever.
The GOP is. I mean, it's say the phrase, say the bumper sticker, cut the YouTube clip, send it out to raise money from MAGA morons. I mean, this is a congressman who was hiding, barricaded, afraid for his life on January 6th, who went out and said that these were just peaceful tourists walking around the Capitol. And this man wants to be the arbiter of our reality. And the fact is, it's not just that he doesn't want to know the truth. It's not just that he's uninterested in the science. It's that he wants you to not be able to learn as well. These are the same people who want to make it illegal to talk about the science of transgenderism in schools. These are people who in Idaho want to have social services take your kids away if you try to talk to a doctor about gender affirming care. They're not interested in building a society based on reality. They're interested in implementing their own narrow, Christo-fascist view of reality that denies these people even exist. And I'm glad at least that AOC stood up and took none of it.
So there's a bunch of biased claims being made there, and I don't think that they're quite accurate. But the arbiters of reality thing is interesting because I think that there's a parallel on the left and the right when it comes to that, and that seems to be lost on them. And part of it is because they're biased; they're operating under a certain set of presuppositions that they just take for granted. But like, there are competing truth claims about what's real and what are the facts of the matter here for sure. And it's part of what makes these things so high stakes and controversial in the first place. Is it like what is the reality as it pertains to the criteria of correctness for one's gender identity, for example? There are competing claims about that, and I've articulated that several times before. But what is the reality fundamentally, right? Like, you can object to the version of reality that the no good, very bad, evil Republicans, as the progressives have come to think of them and talk about them, and then you can offer your competing claims. But like there's still going to come down, like, at the end of the day, there's a fact of the matter concerning that, and your side may be wrong. I know that you don't think your side is wrong, but your side may be wrong. I don't know that there's anywhere in the country where they try to outlaw the science of transgenderism. I think that what they're objecting to is the ideological tenets that they disregard. They think that those are harmful. But if you regard it as scientific and fact-based, like, okay. But like, is the place to have that debate or establish those facts in elementary school classes? Like, can you at least admit that there's some controversy there? Like, shouldn't that debate be happening on maybe college campuses? Does that debate happen on college campuses? Because it seems like the progressive types regard this as settled science when it's far from that, right? Like that's what's interesting about that, is like they're actively participating in the construction of a reality that may deviate from actual reality, but they're presenting it as though the other side is the only one doing that and not their side. That's rich. That's interesting. And particularly on the issue of transgenderism, it may turn out that the progressives are just dead wrong on this. One of the pieces of evidence that I would present is that in other countries, they're actually starting to like fall way the fuck back on like giving various forms of what they call gender affirming care to like young people, because of all of the like devastating and permanent effects, negative effects that it has, including but not limited to things like sterilization, the inability to experience orgasms, etc., that a lot of these procedures that they undergo for transition purposes have. And we're starting to actually get recorded all of the instances of regret that people have that undergo these very permanent things. And it doesn't seem very scientific, the ways with which leftists try to quash that and act like those things don't matter. But alas, the very people who are on the side of the people who do shit like that are complaining about the no good, very bad, evil Republicans proselytizing their version of reality. Now, to still man their side a little bit, I do think that Republicans, particularly those who are particularly religious, do have a conception of reality that seems to deviate from reality in a fundamental way, but is conducive to their kind of religiosity, their theology. And they try to inculcate into law things that are based on those principles in ways that come off as basically dictating from religious precepts all kinds of facets of our society, including but not limited to laws. And that seems to be legislating morality from a very particular conception onto other people. And so that kind of thing makes sense to object to. And there's a long-standing history of objecting to that kind of thing because our society is supposed to fundamentally be secular, right? But there's an intimate connection between values and the religious, presuppositions people have, and values and the ideological presuppositions people have. And so the irony here is that both sides are guilty of this same kind of thing. People right of center tend to be guilty of the kind of theological presuppositions and then kind of like getting their moral precepts and principles from that. But on the left, it seems to be more ideological in nature than religious. It doesn't seem to be religious, but it seems to be definitely ideological. And so a lot of their values come from various ideological presuppositions as opposed to theological ones that don't necessarily entail the worship or the acknowledgement of any kind of deity, but definitely entail a whole bunch of prescriptions around whether or not like what groups of people we ought to respect, which ones that we should prioritize given the history of the country. There's a lot of cynicism around the ills and the evils of capitalism, of white people, etc. And so they're very, very different in terms of the nature of the kinds of claims that are being made in general, but they have a whole bunch of implications and presuppositions about what human nature is like and what we owe each other, morally speaking. And so you can be dogmatic about any of those things. And I think that both sides have trouble seeing the mirrored patterns from the other side because of those fundamental differences in starting points. Theology is not quite the same as ideology, but they are similar and they are related, right? So that's kind of my conception of what's going on here. All right, let's keep going.
I certainly agree that for a lot of the base, it's a genuinely held, awful, horrendous view. But I'm also not going to give a pass to so many of their leaders, whether in elected office or on TV, that didn't give a damn about this topic 2 years ago. And in 2 years from now, they'll be talking about Dr. Seuss again instead or something. They don't actually care about this. It is a convenient thing to get from their perspective, rubes fired up so that they don't question the economic order of things.
So that's a very bold assertion. So like, why is he so convinced that these people don't care genuinely about these issues? Like, is it possible that they care about them, but they don't care about them in the way that you care about them because of the differences in basic presuppositions that they're starting with? Because that would make more sense, is that they care, but they don't care the same way you would care. Why would you expect them to if they don't have the same starting points, the same presuppositions as you do? Wouldn't that make more sense? Like, why does he keep repeating that they don't really care? They don't really care. I don't know. Maybe he just has low expectations of politicians in general. Because if I were to ask him, do you think that Democrats really care about some of the shit that they be talking about that you even agree with? He might say no. He might maintain that cynicism, that same cynical energy for both sides. I don't know.
That's my view. But really fast, just because she did a great job, we got to go to a bit of Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez responding to this in this clip.
All right, I'm going to skip that because we watched that already.
response. And I also, because Dr. Kumar didn't get a chance to actually speak in that hearing, Dr. Kumar did tweet out, trans people exist, trans people have abortions. Abortion is essential health care, and so is gender affirming care. I will not let bullies who are out of touch with reality silence or stop me from advocating for people who need trans and abortion care.
Okay, so this is just a blatant lie. So he did get to speak. I mean, he was brought there to give a testimony. I actually showed the testimony in part 1 of this in its entirety. So he gave a full testimony, and then I think it would be more accurate to say that he didn't get to speak very much when he was giving an exchange with Representative Clyde. I think that's true, but the idea that he didn't get to speak much in the hearing at all is just wrong. Like, that's not true at all. And then actually, there was a part of the exchange with Representative Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, where she actually asked him directly to comment on some things, and then he answered as well. So he actually got to answer several times and talk to several different people throughout the hearing. The hearing is like 3 hours or 4 hours long, something like that, a little over 3 hours. So yeah, but he did give that tweet. So it's kind of like a little lie, but I'm not pointing out just like the TYT lies about everything. I just want to be clear, like, what actually went down. Like, I don't know that he gave this tweet because he couldn't speak. And then actually the other thing is, so right after Representative Clyde went, the next person, who I assume was a Democrat, I don't know his name, asked if he wanted to respond, like, as the first part of his time, the new person's time, like, do you want to respond to that? And then he actually got to respond and answer the question in full, that Clyde wouldn't let him answer during Clyde's time. It's like, but what sucks about that is that he had to take some of the time of the next person, who was a Democrat, in order to do that, and he didn't take any of Clyde's time, which I think most of Clyde's kind of like shoehorning and steamrolling, it seemed to be motivated by the fact that he was limited to whatever 5 or 6 minutes, which is a lot of them in on the committee are limited to that amount of time. So I can understand why they wouldn't be very permissive of people giving long-winded answers that don't really answer the question. I understand that under that context. But the Young Turks are framing it as if he did it because he was trying to get some very specific talking points out so that he could, I guess, arouse his base and raise money. Like, that's a very cynical view. Maybe it's true. I think he definitely, there was some intentionality to his questions. It seemed like he definitely was trying to get Dr. Kumar to admit some shit that's going to make Dr. Kumar look bad. I think that's true. I don't know how much money he's going to raise from his MAGA base or whatever, but maybe he raised money off that. I don't know. I don't know why the cynicism like presumes that there's some kind of like profit incentive in all of these cases. Sometimes people just want to dunk on the libs. But whatever, maybe, I don't know, maybe there was some kind of monetary benefit. Maybe he gets $200,000 every time he dunks on the libs. I don't know, or some shit. Maybe he gets major campaign donations every time he dunks on the libs or some shit. I don't know. Maybe that's how our government works. Trans people exist. Trans people have abortions. Abortion is essential health care, and so is gender affirming care. The trans people exist thing as a retort to anything Republicans say has always been weird to me, because I don't know that, again, I don't think Republicans are denying the ontological status of trans people. I think that the sense in which Republicans or conservative types think trans people are illegitimate is that they think that their claims with respect to their gender identity claims with respect to what they are in error, in analogous to the claim that a anorexic person makes about themselves being overweight is in error. That's what I think that they think. So this trans people exist thing is weird. I will not let bullies who are out of touch with reality silence or stop me from advocating for people who need trans and abortion care. So this is actually rich to me. People who are out of touch with reality in this case are supposed to be the no good, very bad, evil Republicans who believe that trans people don't exist. First of all, that's not quite true that they believe that. Secondly, who's more out of touch? A person who falsely believes of themselves that there's something that they're not, or the person who criticizes them for that delusional belief? What do y'all think? And I'm being loose here because I'm trying to maintain some neutrality. Like, it's really, whether the applicability of the question as I asked it to this trans issue is going to hinge on whether or not you fundamentally believe that what a trans person is doing is asserting that they are something that they're not, or if they're asserting something true about themselves. Right? That's going to hinge on whether or not you think that's going to have implications for who's really out of touch here. And that's the point I seek to make, is the assertion here is that the Republicans are the ones out of touch, because from the point of view of the progressive types, the truest thing here is that trans people exist, and they are exactly what they say they are. A trans woman is a woman because they think they're a woman, or whatever other reasons I'm leaving out. I want to be generous here to the view, right? And a trans man is a man, full stop, because they think they are, or because that's what it means to be a trans man, or something. I don't know what the reasons are, but like it's like the contention here is that it's real, it's true. They're not lying, they're not making it up. They're genuinely what they say they are. And anybody who has any doubt about that is guilty of something bad. They're guilty of not believing them, which is bad. They're guilty of hatred. They're guilty of denying reality, and these are bad, apparently. And they may be bullies, and they're anti-scientific because science proves this true too. Science, apparently, according to this view, has proven not only that trans people exist, but that trans people are exactly what they say they are. Science proved this. Science proves that trans men are men and trans women are women, says science, apparently. Okay, I guess. And so, to me, I think what they're really trying to do is to just be inclusive of trans people, and not exclude them, insofar as you have people who are capable of pregnancy who are trans, and they're implicated in this abortion debate. That's what I think they're trying to do. Full stop. I think that's the simplest way to put it. And I think that one of the reasons why there's a tension in the context of this abortion issue, that where this trans thing comes up, is that I think what Republicans are trying to do is they're trying to expose what I think they perceive as the kind of woke-tarded nonsense of the ideologies that undergird these positions. They're trying to say that they're trying to imply that anybody who's pro-choice or who has these kind of stereotypical progressive views and beliefs and agendas are motivated by the same ideology that leads people to say dumb shit, according to them, such as men can get pregnant. Right, like the same people who are saying men can get pregnant, right? Like we don't want them having any say in our policy because they're crazy. That seems to be what they're trying to demonstrate. And they make arguments like this all the time.